If you like our short stories, please like, comment, and subscribe. Welcome to Sleepy Stories. Tonight, I invite you to step into the corridors of an old Victorian house, a place where every footstep echoes with secrets, and a single locked door has remained sealed for generations. For the next few moments, let the outside world melt away. Let your imagination wander down the worn wooden floors, past the flickering lamps, and toward the one threshold no one has crossed for decades. The question is, will you dare to open the door that never opened? Let the story begin. Elise stepped out of the taxi onto the cracked driveway, gripping her suitcase with one hand and an old ring of keys with the other. Overhead, gray clouds swirled, threatening rain. The estate loomed before her, a towering Victorian manor her grandfather had called Hillwood House. It stood in stark silence, shutters closed like eyelids in a restless dream. She hesitated at the gate, inhaling the scent of wet leaves. The driver coughed, impatient to be on his way, so she forced herself forward, pushing open the iron gate with a whining groan. This was the house she had inherited just a week ago, along with a cryptic note from her grandfather's lawyer. You must live at Hillwood for at least 3 months to claim your inheritance. 3 months in this chilly, ancient fortress of a house. Elise told herself it was worth it. She needed the money more than she feared any old mansion. She fumbled with the massive front door keys. One by one the locks gave way. An echoing creak announced her entrance. The grand foyer was dimly lit by streaks of the fading afternoon sun slicing through stained glass windows. Dust motes danced in the beam. Everything smelled of aged timber and a faint hint of mildew. A spiral staircase coiled to the second floor, its banister carved with twisting vines and flowers. The air felt heavier than it should, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Dragging her suitcase, Elise ventured farther in. The first floor layout was straightforward. A sprawling living room with tall windows, a dining room with a long wooden table, and a small library lined wall to wall with old books that probably hadn't been opened in decades. But something felt off. She might not have noticed it if the note from the lawyer hadn't mentioned a door you cannot open. At the time, she dismissed it as a metaphor for family secrets. But now Elise sensed a peculiar draft in the halls. The corridor leading from the dining room to the kitchen had 4 doors, each leading to side rooms or storage spaces. 3 of them stood ajar. The 4th at the very end was firmly closed. Its bronze doorknob was tarnished green with age. She tried the handle, locked. She would have moved on if not for a single startling detail. A faint tapping sound came from within, as if fingernails rapped against the wood from the other side. Elise froze, heart pounding in her ears. She pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. A jolt of adrenaline rushed through her. Her eyes flicked around, wondering if she'd imagined it. Only the quiet hush of the old house surrounded her. The tapping did not return. She found the keyring in her jacket pocket, hoping one of them might fit. She tried 3, then 4. None worked. Frustrated, she wiggled a 5th key, still no luck. She decided to search the house for more keys later. Maybe her grandfather had hidden something somewhere. That evening, Elise settled into what was once her grandfather's study. Papers lay scattered on the mahogany desk. A photograph of him in younger days, leaning against a vintage car, stared back at her. Beside it, a few clippings of old newspaper articles, mentions of a missing caretaker, rumors about hidden passages in Hillwood. She felt a prick of unease but brushed it off as imagination sparked by the house's atmosphere. Night fell quickly. She found a bedroom on the 2nd floor that seemed relatively clean. After dusting off the bed and unfolding some spare sheets, Elise lay down, listening to the rasp of branches against the window. Exhaustion tugged at her. With the bedside lamp switched off, darkness pressed in, thick and still. Around midnight, a distant tap-tap-tap punctured the quiet. Elise's eyes sprang open. She held her breath, thinking it was just the wind. Yet it persisted, faint but deliberate. The locked door. It had to be. Her heart drummed. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, intending to investigate, then stopped. Fear rooted her in place. It was her first night here, and investigating eerie noises in the dead of night felt like a scene ripped from a horror movie. She was alone, with no neighbors close by, no caretaker, and no phone signal, that last detail courtesy of the thick walls and rural setting. Instead, she lay back listening. Tap, tap, tap. Silence. Tap, tap. Silence. She waited, chest tight, until it finally stopped. Eventually, sleep claimed her, riddled with dreams of shadowy figures behind closed doors. Morning light found Elise wide awake. She rose, determined to explore every inch of the house in daylight. She marched downstairs, ignoring the goosebumps creeping over her skin. In the corridor, that stubborn door remained locked. She inspected its edges. No keyhole was visible on the outside. Strange. The handle and a tarnished keyhole plate were there, but the opening itself looked sealed over, almost fused to the wood. Had her grandfather done this deliberately? A whisper of movement behind her made her jump. She spun around, but the hallway was empty. Yet she felt watched, as though the house itself kept an unseen vigil. Pulling herself together, Elise told herself that the best way to fight fear was with knowledge. She'd scour the house for a clue, some reference to this locked door and her grandfather's belongings. Because one thing was certain. Something in this house wanted her attention. Elise began her morning search in the library. The room smelled of old parchment, leather binding, and something faintly sweet, like decaying flowers. 3 tall windows cast diagonal stripes of light across the carpet, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily in the still air. She ran her fingers over the spines of books whose titles had worn away decades ago. A shelf in the corner sagged under the weight of yellowed journals and scrapbooks, potentially promising places to find clues. She lifted one thick scrapbook onto a reading table. Its cover crackled at her touch. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs of the estate in its heyday, and snippets of what seemed to be her grandfather's research notes. One headline caught her eye: "Caretaker missing at Hillwood House." A chill zipped down her spine as she read about a man named Gregory Pike, who vanished under mysterious circumstances nearly 20 years ago. Beneath the article, her grandfather's handwritten note read, "Gregory used to say he heard things behind that door, scratching, tapping. Once he claimed to see it move on its own, found him nearly hysterical in the corridor. I can't let this get out." Elise swallowed, hands trembling. The memory of the tapping she'd heard the night before ignited a flurry of uneasy questions. Was the same unseen presence that tormented Gregory still roaming the halls? Determined to push forward, she dove deeper into the scrapbook. Page after page documented odd rumors, unexplained cold spots, glimpses of figures in the corner of the eye, voices whispering at the edges of hearing. Her grandfather's scrawling letters mentioned attempts to seal the door with specialized locks, something about ancient wards, yet he never explained what or why. Finally, she found a photograph of the corridor itself. The door in question looked different, adorned with symbols carved around the frame. Those carvings were now nowhere to be seen. A note in the margin read, "If the wards fail, the door must remain locked. Under no circumstances should anyone open it." A bang from downstairs jolted Elise, causing her to slam the scrapbook shut. Heart pounding, she hurried out of the library, crossing the foyer to the living room. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss, until she noticed the side entrance to the garden stood open, curtains fluttering in a sudden gust of wind. She was certain she'd locked it earlier. She stepped outside, scanning the unkempt grounds. The garden was a jungle of wild vines and towering weeds. A rusted bench leaned precariously under a half-dead oak. Nobody appeared to be lurking around. Still, the door shouldn't have been wide open like that. Stepping back inside, she secured the lock. An uneasy notion took hold. Was someone in the house with her? She made a quick sweep of the ground floor. All seemed normal, except for a faint, muddy footprint just inside the side entrance, too large to be her own. Alarmed, she grabbed her phone. 0 bars. The landline she had seen in the hall was dead, the wire severed at the base. Anxiety spiked. She retreated to the study for comfort, only to be greeted by a small stack of papers that lay scattered across the floor. They looked freshly disturbed. Kneeling, she noticed these were letters from her grandfather's desk drawer. One slip of paper bore a cryptic line in his handwriting: "Evil is no ghost. It breathes, it watches. Gregory was right to be afraid." Clutching the note, Elise couldn't help but picture someone or something breathing behind that locked door. Watching. At any moment she expected a shadow to drift across the foyer, or a voice to whisper behind her. The silence was oppressive, amplified by her own hammering pulse. A sudden crash sounded from the corridor, the very one housing the mysterious door. She rushed out, pulse racing, to find a portrait had fallen from the wall. The glass lay shattered on the floor, and the painting's frame was cracked. The portrait was of her grandfather. Splinters of glass glinted ominously, almost like a warning. When she looked up, her gaze inevitably drifted to that door. This time she heard no tapping. Instead, she felt a tug, an odd sensation in her chest like a quiet pull urging her closer. She inched forward until she stood in front of the door once more. It seemed to radiate a subtle chill. Gingerly, she placed a hand on the worn wood. The surface was colder than the rest of the house. How was that possible? She leaned in, pressing her ear against it again. At first she heard nothing. Then, under the hush of her own breathing, she detected a faint scratching sound. It was rhythmic, patient, as if something within was slowly testing the barrier. Scratch, scratch! Elise yanked her head back, heart hammering. She remembered the keys in her pocket. Futile, all of them. Yet there had to be another way. Her grandfather might have hidden a special key or a solution in his journals. She hurried back to the library, rummaging through shelves and drawers until she stumbled upon a small locked box. It was iron, with a single symbol etched on its lid, something resembling an eye enclosed by swirling lines. She tried each key on her grandfather's ring, but none fit. Figures. Grumbling in frustration, she nearly flung the box aside when she noticed an envelope taped to its underside. Inside the envelope was a slip of parchment with strange symbols and a single phrase in Latin, Serva Ianuam clausam. Roughly, she recognized it from her high school classes as meaning, keep the door closed. That was precisely what her grandfather had been trying to do. But why? What was he so determined to contain? As Elise pondered these questions, the feeling of being watched returned, prickling the back of her neck. She spun around and thought she saw movement near the library's threshold. A flicker of a shadow, gone in an instant. Nightfall arrived sooner than she expected. The weather turned stormy, with thunder rumbling across the sky like distant war drums. Rain lashed against the stained glass windows, casting rippling colors on the library walls. With no working phone, no caretaker, and no immediate solution to the locked box, she realized she was essentially on her own. Elise considered leaving, but going where and how? The estate was miles from any neighbor, and the storm battered the surrounding roads. Besides, she'd agreed to stay 3 months to claim the inheritance. Without those funds, she couldn't save her fledgling business back home. She had to see this through, no matter how unsettling Hillwood House became, or how dangerous. Clutching the iron box under one arm, she grabbed a flashlight and headed upstairs. If the door was cold as ice, maybe the rest of the house held other temperature anomalies that hinted at hidden spaces or passageways. Victorians were notorious for secret rooms and concealed corridors. She could sense one was nearby, waiting to be discovered. Upstairs, each bedroom looked more forlorn than the last, sagging beds, peeling wallpaper, and curtain rods dangling precariously. At the end of the hall, she found a trap door in the ceiling leading to the attic. She pulled the cord. A narrow ladder descended with a groan. At that exact moment, she heard it again, faint, insistent, tap, tap, scratch. The sound drifted up the stairwell from below, as if beckoning her. The corridor light flickered, and she realized the power was now starting to waver in the storm. Breathing heavily, Elise braced herself. She had a choice: investigate the attic or confront whatever lurked behind that locked door. Something told her she needed more clues before she risked a direct confrontation. The attic might hold the answers, or a fresh set of horrors. Her grip tightened on the flashlight. Step by step, she ascended into the darkness above, heart pounding with every creak of the ladder. Elise pulled herself into the attic, the ladder groaning under her weight. The beam of her flashlight cut through swirling dust, revealing a cramped space filled with old trunks, mildewed boxes, and furniture draped in moth-eaten sheets. Thunder rattled the rafters, and the rain battered the roof with unrelenting fury. She took a few cautious steps forward, breathing shallowly. The attic had that thick, stale scent of long-forgotten memories. Her flashlight caught a series of footprints in the dust, footprints that weren't hers. Someone had been here recently. The tracks led around a pile of boxes toward a low, slanted corner near the far side of the attic. Clutching the iron box she'd found downstairs, Elise followed the footprints. Each step made the floor creak ominously. When she reached the corner, her light revealed a small writing desk with a single drawer. A large trunk rested beside it, its lid slightly ajar. She peered inside the trunk and found thick blankets, old coats, and a battered suitcase. Everything looked mundane, until she spotted a tarnished metal cylinder tucked behind the fabrics. It was about the size of a large thermos, covered with strange symbols. She shook it gently and heard something rattle inside. Setting the cylinder aside, Elise opened the writing desk's drawer. Within, she discovered a leather-bound diary with a gold clasp. The name Gregory Pike was etched on the first page. Her throat went dry. This was the missing caretaker's journal. Flipping through the pages, she found entries detailing his day-to-day tasks at Hillwood, cleaning the fireplace, polishing the floors, cooking for her grandfather. But as she continued, the tone shifted. The writing became frantic, scrawled with shaky lines. No one believes me, but I hear it behind the door at night. Something alive. I told the master, but he insists we must keep it locked. I feel it watching me, even through the wood. Further entries grew more desperate. There was a voice, whispering my name. Gregory. Gregory. I tried to ignore it. Then the tapping started, and the handle rattled on its own. I can't sleep. I see shadows in the corner of my eye. I beg the master to destroy the door, but he refuses. He says it's bound by wards. We mustn't break them. I can't stay here anymore. The final page was splattered with ink blots. Leaving tonight. If I can't stop it, I must warn the world. God forgive me for what I've done. A wave of sympathy for Gregory washed over her, mixed with a deeper dread. He had been the caretaker who vanished, and it seemed whatever haunted that door had driven him away. Or worse, devoured him. Clang! The sudden sound of metal striking metal jolted her. Elise whirled around to see the cylinder she'd set aside roll across the attic floor, hitting a support beam. She must have knocked it over, but it still made her heart race. Carefully, she picked it up again and examined the symbols etched on its surface. They resembled those in her grandfather's scrapbook, ancient wards and runes. Twisting the top, she discovered it was locked tight. But in the dim light, she noticed a seam that might pop open if the right pressure was applied. With a bit of force, she managed to unseal it. Inside was a single antique key wrapped in a scrap of cloth covered in more runic symbols. Elise's eyes widened. Could this be the key to the door downstairs? A shiver ran through her as she remembered her grandfather's warnings. Under no circumstances should anyone open it. Yet everything in the house seemed to push her toward that very act. The caretaker's footprints in the attic, the missing phone line, the tapping in the night. Someone, or something, wanted her to face whatever was behind that door. She stuffed the key in her pocket, closed the cylinder, and hurried back toward the attic entrance. That was when she heard footsteps below, heavy, measured steps pacing the corridor. Her flashlight flickered, and she wondered if the storm was causing a power surge. The steps paused at the foot of the ladder. Elise held her breath. "Hello?" she called softly. There was no reply, only a shuffling sound. She couldn't discern if it was human or something else. Seconds later, the footsteps retreated. Elise exhaled in relief. Descending the ladder, she braced herself for a confrontation, but the corridor lay empty. The locked door at the end was still shut tight. But now she noticed deep scratch marks on the wood that hadn't been there before. Lightning flashed through a window, illuminating her next steps. She had to decide, investigate further or run for her life. Fear battled curiosity. A part of her wanted to flee into the storm, never looking back, inheritance be damned. But she recalled Gregory's journal. The caretaker had tried to leave, and no one ever heard from him again. Maybe the only way out was through. With trembling hands, Elise pulled out the antique key. The hush in the corridor felt suffocating. Rain hammered the windows like 1,000 ghostly fingers. Every nerve in her body screamed that she was making a terrible mistake. Yet she slid the key into the tarnished keyhole plate. Despite the corrosion, the key slid in smoothly, as if it had always belonged there. She twisted once, resistance. Another twist, something clicked. The doorknob turned under her hand. Elise drew a shaky breath and pushed the door open. A gust of frigid air rushed out, carrying a stench of decay. Her flashlight flickered wildly, threatening to go dark. Beyond the threshold lay a small bare room. The walls were damp with rivulets of water that seeped through the stone. In the center of the floor was a ragged hole, like an abandoned well or shaft, descending into darkness. A faint scraping echoed up from below. Heart-pounding, Elise stepped closer. The hole seemed impossibly deep, its edges crumbling. She aimed her flashlight down, revealing slick, mossy stones. That was when something moved, a shape scuttling just out of range of the beam. Suddenly an unholy shriek tore through the air. The flashlight sputtered, and she glimpsed a clawed hand, or was it a malformed limb, gripping the edge of the well. Panicked, Elise staggered back as a rush of wind soared up from the darkness, extinguishing her light completely. In absolute blackness, a second shriek reverberated, vibrating through her bones. Blind, she scrambled for the corridor. Lightning flashed through the open door behind her, revealing a nightmarish silhouette heaving itself over the well's rim, crawling on all fours. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the lightning like hungry embers. Elise's breath caught in her throat. This was no ghost, it was flesh or something akin to it. It let out a ragged hiss, and in one monstrous lunge propelled itself forward. She barely managed to dodge, feeling its claws snag her sleeve. Tearing free, she plunged into the corridor. The thing from below gave chase, slithering on the floor with unnatural speed. Elise hurled herself through the hallway, adrenaline surging. She reached the foyer and yanked hard on the front door. It flew open to the storm-lashed night. She dashed into the downpour, splashing through puddles, half blinded by wind and rain. Behind her, she heard an inhuman wail echo off the manor walls. Lightning flashed. She saw it crouched at the threshold, its pale, contorted face twisting with fury. But it would not follow into the open. Perhaps the wards extended beyond the door's threshold, or maybe it feared the storm. Whatever the reason, Elise kept running until her lungs burned. Eventually, the creature's cries faded into the howl of the wind. She found temporary shelter under a sagging stone arch near the garden's edge, trembling with cold and terror. The key was gone, lost in her desperate flight. The door was open. Elise realized the horrifying truth. She had unleashed whatever had been sealed away. Now, it prowled the halls of Hillwood House, possibly waiting for the next poor soul who wandered into its domain. As lightning splintered the sky overhead, Elise knew only one certainty. She could never return to that house, never risk that corridor again. Because in that locked room, and the chasm it protected, something ancient, alive, and unspeakably hungry had finally been set free.